I work at the Savory Institute. My name is Kerston. For us, regenerative agriculture is this notion of measurable positive outcomes to the environment without compromising on the quantity and quality of products that we're growing for human use and consumption. So it's really net positive outcomes on the land. I spent my life 15 years full-time farming before joining the Savory Institute. If you're not familiar with our work, it's a 50-year-old movement called holistic management that is a triple bottom line proactive planning procedure that we teach ranchers how to utilize to make their land better than worse. So there is a net positive grazing that exists in the world that's alive and well, but it's a small subset compared to conventional grazing, and we have to make that a much bigger reality. We have 40 field offices around the globe that we call Savory Hubs. These hubs support these ranchers in their region with the support from us at the global level. And we've launched a new program called Land to Market that connects the best ranchers with the most forward-leaning brands in being able to access that supply. And we utilize a new tool that we call ecological outcome verification. This is based on something we've been doing for 30 years and in the last 5 years have done a lot of iterations and growth on. But basically we take measurements of the land, of what's really happening, empirical values of what's happening on the ground. We get a value for that ranch, so we look at things like soil organic matter, carbon, water infiltration rates. We look at biodiversity in the soil, biodiversity of the plant life. We're working on getting better at capturing population numbers for wildlife. And we look at how that ecosystem functions as a whole. And we can part and parcel that data out as needed, but then we roll it up into a score, and we take that score and we trend it over time. And then we work with amazing brands, some that were on the previous panel, some on this panel, and we connect those two together so that they can be able to source that product. So that's what we do, and I will turn it to my left here, and we'll all each introduce ourselves for a couple minutes.
Great. I'm first. Great. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for putting this panel together. I'm Birgit Cameron. I'm the director of Patagonia Provisions. Started Patagonia Provisions with Yvonne Chenard, our founder, and Rose Marcario, our CEO of Patagonia as a whole. We really went down this road because we have been touching agriculture for 40 years through cotton, organic cotton, Ulex, wool, hemp, all of these things that were so much a part of the agricultural system. And sometimes, you know, when you think of clothing, you don't think of where it comes from as much as you do when it's food, right? We all can relate to food no matter who we are. We need to eat 3 times a day and then some, so of course. And also the thing in touching that supply chain for so long that was really important to us was just that, you know, if you think of us as an environmental company, that's such a huge thread to our, or part of our ethos to take care of the earth, that agriculture as it relates to food is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. And so we couldn't stay away. We felt like this was such a natural progression for us to go down this road. And so we started Provisions. And Provisions is really about rethinking our food supply chain. Everything we make has a very deep reason for being. So our salmon is about making sure we have wild salmon populations in our future. So really looking at the harvesting techniques. Our buffalo is about conservation of the prairie and how important that is for sequestering carbon. The veg and agroforest products are all about regenerative organic practices. And so we really start from a place of what is the problem, let's find a solution, let's put a product out to market that really addresses a problem rather than picking things that are on trend. So that's sort of a little bit about how we're approaching this.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Birgit. Gina.
Hi, I'm Gina Asudagan. I'm the Vice President of Mission and Innovation Strategy at Applegate, and I lead our new regenerative platform. And the shift toward regenerative for us, it's really a continuation of our mission. So our mission has always been changing the meat we eat. And for the first 30 years, that meant removing antibiotics from the food system. I think now we're moving to this idea of moving away from claims to looking at systems holistically. So what we've done for so long is try to shoehorn nature to fit a claim on a package. And now we need to look at the system holistically. One size fits all doesn't fit, first of all, and it's not really for all. So that's the change, I think, that has driven us, or the mindset that has driven us toward regenerative. Also, there's a prevailing narrative that meat is bad for the planet. And it's not necessarily that meat is bad, but how we're raising it. So what I love about the regenerative principles are the understanding that animals, if raised correctly, are one of the most important ways, or the most the most successful ways that we can use, the most successful ways to sequester carbon into the soil. So I really feel like for a company like Applegate, we can change the narrative around meat. It's not like I think you see in this expo, it's all plant-based, and meat has become very demonized, and I'd like to change the way we view that. Just change the way we look at meat and how it's produced. So.
All right, Ed.
My name is Ed Seemek, and I work with Pipeline Foods. So Pipeline Foods is a supply chain, and we are dedicated to the organic and regeneratively grown grains and oilseed space. And actually, when we started the company, we're only a 2-year-old company, but we're growing very aggressively. But when we started the company, it was really about the topic of today's discussion: is how do we help bridge the gap between the food company and the farm? And so what we have done with being a supply chain company is we have our assets and our operations and our commercial operations, and we sell and move grain. But then we also created 2 services. So the first one is the Ag Impact Team, which I lead at Pipeline Foods. And the Ag Impact Team works with food companies to help them create or design regenerative sourcing solutions, meaning we help them get back to the farm. So whether it's measuring the practices that are on the farm, whether it's measuring outcomes on the farm, sharing the visibility to the farm, we're able to create supply chains that do exactly that. And then on the other end, we have what we call our Farm Profit Program. That program works with the farmers to provide the support that they would need, whether it's capital support, whether it's knowledge support, or just peer group support. We're creating that community to help those farmers either transition to organic or adopt regenerative practices. And so when you think of Pipeline Foods, we are the Ag Impact Team. I would say think of it as sustainability as a service. So it is a service that we're providing to food companies to help them create these regenerative supply chains.
Sophie.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie Ackoff. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Campaigns for the National Young Farmers Coalition. We are a grassroots network of young farmers and ranchers and supportive consumers all across the country, fighting for a better future for agriculture. And I'm so relieved this session is happening at Expo West this year because farmers have to be a part of finding the solutions to the problems that are in our food system. And that's actually why we got started as a coalition back in 2010. We were, as young farmers, we're facing really insurmountable challenges in getting started and growing our farm businesses. And we realized that if we weren't going to advocate for solutions to the challenges we were facing, that nobody else was going to do it for us. And we found amazingly receptive partners in Congress and with businesses who are responding to our needs as young farmers, as young entrepreneurs in rural districts, and really hearing that and figuring out solutions to our problems with us. And so just since 2010, some of our biggest wins have been historic investments in beginning farmer training in the Farm Bill, 50% increase in farmland conservation dollars at the federal level, USDA microloan program that has helped 30,000 farmers across the country get started. So we're on the right path. But the truth is that we're on the verge of another farm crisis, and we've been touching on it already today, but it's an economic crisis. Net farm incomes have decreased 50% since 2013. It's really scary. It's also a crisis of attrition where our farmers are aging out and retiring. The average age is 58. Farmers over 65 outnumber farmers under 35 by 6 to 1. And that means that the land that they're farming is about to transition. And the problem is when that land goes on the market, working farmers can't compete for that land. Non-farmers can easily outbid working farmers. And so we can't just let that happen without good policy and companies who are really looking towards the future. So if farmers can't succeed now and young people can't get into agriculture, what is the future supply for our product? So the industry is thriving, companies want to be involved. So I think the question really is, will companies stand up with farmers who are really the foundation of their businesses?
Well, that's a great transition to the first question I wanted to bring out is, really the consumers at this point aren't demanding regenerative agriculture. We all see the reasons for it. But Gina, I was so impressed with how Applegate led the way to antibiotic-free. And you really had to take on the role of educating this consumer of why it even mattered. You were there before even your buyer was. Why are you doing the same in regenerative? What's the ROI on that? What can someone expect? If one of the brands in the audience is thinking, why would I get involved in this? What would your answer be?
The role of a mission-based company is to drive demand, not follow it. So if you are a mission-based company and you're not taking risks and making those commitments, you have to really am I putting my money where my mouth is? I mean, we are a company that's owned by Hormel. And when we were purchased, they made it very clear, our job is to drive demand, their job will ultimately be to follow it. We were purchased by them because they were following demand. This is where they saw the market going. So I think that is the dynamic. I also think, what is the ROI for being a leader in a new market is to be a leader in a new market. I mean, you become known as, you become associated with that idea, and that's what we hope to do with regenerative agriculture.
And just to follow up on that, the last 20 years, I think, has been this age of point-of-sale premiums for brands like yours. Do you think that this is the next era of that, or is this more of a market share play, or both?
I think we have to look at premiums differently. You can no longer, if you're really thinking and looking at things, believe that you can now pass on your inefficiencies in the form of a premium. And I'm going to say that again, because that's important. You cannot pass on your inefficiencies in the form of a premium. It is incumbent upon brands and upon businesses to be efficient and to be smart and to, in the case of an animal, to utilize the entire animal so that we can bring that product to market at an affordable price. Because now, I think with today's educated consumer, especially among the younger generations, they know, they see, they look. It's like, if you have a premium, it has to be really indicative of value. Not just because, in the case of animals, you can just buy whatever parts you want, not worry about the rest, and then just pass that, higher price on to the consumer. So I think that there are new models of how we could do that. One of the things I'm learning from a company like Hormel, and this is very much about what conventional businesses do, they're very efficient that way. Hormel has this expression, we sell everything but the oink. That is not the case in, these more niche markets, but we have to, if Applegate can't fully utilize the animal, then we have to bring in partners that can help us do that. And that's the way I see maybe this new idea around doing business. It's more about collaboration on that front for the purposes of bringing a product to the market in the most efficient way.
Totally. So, like most of us in the room here come from the food space. Most of our team at Savory comes from either food or production. And we've spent the last 3-4 years really digging into textile and apparel. So Bergen, I'm super curious where you see potential synergies between the food and apparel world. I mean, just at the surface level of what we've learned, it seems like apparel really has processing figured out, and food really has direct sourcing back to the producer figured out. But it seems like there's so much the two could learn from one another. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Totally. I think there's a number of ways where that's playing out in our...
Here we go.
I think there's a number of ways that's playing out in our supply chain right now. We have cotton growers that are moving toward regenerative organic certified, regenerative organic practices, and the complementary crops for that system to the organic cotton are lentils, chickpeas, turmeric, there's like a list of 20 of them. And so that actually starts to work really well for our food and fiber, and I don't mean food fiber, I mean clothing fiber side of things, to really kind of work together on pushing these practices forward and helping farmers actually have another supply to put into market. And then we create market pull for that. So they're no longer dependent on one crop. They actually have a multitude of crops to put into their system, into their income, into making their farms viable and profitable. On the bison side, utilizing the entire animal is so critical. But what are the other things that we can do in terms of buffalo fill or the hair for the fill or the leather? Utilizing the entire animal is so key, and I love that you brought that up because the Lakota Sioux. If you go to the museums there, the one thing that struck me the most was that the Lakota Sioux had this beautiful statement in one of the places that I visited that indicated 100 uses from one animal. Sure. And that's what we need to go back to, is that kind of thinking. So anyway, those are some ways that we're approaching this piece as we drive toward regenerative, which allows for extra revenue for farmers. I think that's just super critical.
I love that. Yeah. Again, driving home this point about supply chain and processing is where the future's at. Transparency and traceability have become the buzzwords of the most recent era of procurement. If you're in that world at all, you hear those two terms all the time. Ed, I'm super curious about your thoughts of, one, if you can explain what that means, transparency and traceability, and two, how that can help the regenerative agriculture movement grow into the next phase.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question. No, I can't clarify that because I spent 24 months talking with food brands, and yes, traceability and transparency are the buzzwords, but they almost seem interchangeable. Nobody from the food company can define what they're looking for. So when I think about it, and when Pipeline Foods thinks about it, it's about information, and that's the key. So you take a really complex problem and you break it down to really simple things, it comes to information. And whether that's on feed ingredients or on food ingredients, being able to share what's happening on the farm, throughout the supply chain, even transparency in the pricing, so knowing how much it costs to move it from the farm to the elevator to the feed mill. That is the goal of Pipeline Foods, is to share the information. So we're entering into the space to provide two things, actually. One is the product, and two is the information. Because you can't have a regenerative agricultural supply chain if it's an opaque supply chain. You will never know what's happening on the farm. So to be able to share that transparency or share the information, that creates the transparency and traceability that people are looking for, and whether or not they can define it, that doesn't matter. It's more about how do you share information.
Yeah, totally. Right? Sophie, we had a conversation the other day and had some great synergies through the call, and one of the things we talked about is young people make up such a small sector of the agriculture community as a whole, but when you guys look at the data and analyze that data, they're the ones that are leading the way on organic and regenerative practices, which is phenomenal. At the same time, though, I probably hear from producers on a weekly basis that are young going, how do I get into agriculture, whether that's through buying my own land, leasing land, working for somebody else, and they're still struggling to get in. What are the barriers? How do we fix that?
Yeah, absolutely. We did a national survey in 2017, and we found that young farmers are 17 times more likely to be certified organic than the national average. So we have this amazing wave of young people who are getting into agriculture because they want to protect the water and climate, soil resources for the future. So it is really our imperative to support them so that they can succeed. But the barriers are great. Land access is the number one, and we see that both for multi-generational farmers and first-generation farmers. So whether you grew up on a farm or not, land access is still the number one challenge. And it's about the expense of purchasing land. Student loans, actually, the challenges are all really interconnected. But what's happening is young people are graduating with student loans. Even if they're from a farm family, it's encouraged to get an education to bring back to the farm, but what's happening is they're not able to come back to the farm because they need a stable income to pay off student loans. And if somebody is able to start a farm career with student loans, they're having incredible difficulty in accessing additional credit to grow their farm business because of that existing debt burden. So we have a bill in the House and the Senate we need to reintroduce in this new Congress that would add farmers to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. So really addressing that debt like we would with teachers and doctors, other professions that we really are critical to our country, by creating a pipeline out of that debt for young people. So it's 10 years of income-based payments, and then the rest of the loans are forgiven. So we're working on that. On the land access front, there are a lot of creative solutions. Our chapter in Minnesota spearheaded a state bill last year that was a beginning farmer tax credit. So landowners renting or selling to beginning farmers could get a tax incentive. And just in the first year of that program, 450 farms participated in transition to the next generation, receiving $2 million of tax credits. So that was just a small group of young farmers who really saw their land access issue as a problem for the state of Minnesota and wanting a state solution. But we want to see that across the country. So the challenges are intense, but they're structural challenges. They were created through policy, and so we can change them through policy. And I'm also starting to see more companies step up to identify, by working directly with farmers, building that relationship, understanding what their challenges are, able to come in and connect them with long-term leases or land ownership. And so I think we need to move in that direction.
Yeah, I can attest to that. So I've been involved in agriculture since my senior year of high school, been trying to access land ever since. Have been able to do that working through other people and leases, but have not been able to buy my way into that industry and purchase land. Our family's house burned as part of the Paradise Fire that happened in November. And so now our family is taking what money we've got from that and trying to buy a burned piece of land and regenerate that because it's much cheaper after it's burned. So we're getting back into the ranching game ourselves one way or another. So yes, absolutely. Land access is number one. If we can fix that, your guys' supply shortages go away overnight. So it is problem number one from the production standpoint, without a doubt. Gina, I'm really curious. I'm surprised this hasn't come up in either panel to this point yet. Why are you guys investing in measuring outcomes? And you're partly doing that with us. But why are you moving to an outcome-based model versus the traditional practice-based model that we're all used to in other certifications?
Mm-hmm. So for two reasons. On the consumer front, outcomes or measurements, if we can tell that story, it allows consumers to be part of the solution. If we can demonstrate to them through real metrics that their purchase is improving soil quality and soil health, improving water retention and biodiversity, improving farmer livelihood, I mean, that's a good thing to be telling to consumers. I think consumers really want to know that their dollars are going to really help something. And then again, having those true metrics can demonstrate that. On the back end, on the farmer end, the outcomes and the metrics can then allow us to show the farmer that the practices that they are employing on their farms are actually making their land more productive and ultimately more profitable. So more healthy, more productive, more profitable. And it then incentivizes them to do more of those things. So I think, ultimately people will look at data, I'm hoping, and, especially on the farm end, and really see, which is something we can't do right now with these practice-based programs.
Right.
We can't show them the impact of those practices.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Actually be able to measure the outcomes,
Right.
Yeah, Birgit, I think there's a lot more levers in our toolboxes than just premiums, and that's the one that we tend to talk about the most in terms of now not premium at point of sale, but premium for the brand buying from the producer. And I think there are other options out there. By definition, a premium is an impermanent thing. It's something that goes away and becomes a norm and normalizes over time. So I was curious, one, how you're a clothing company that invests in food, but then I've also heard that you guys have invested in processing, down to even grain processing and developing an industry so that producers can sell higher on the value chain. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical part of this whole thing, and we've heard it earlier in other panels as well about infrastructure. Infrastructure is such a critical part of this. We used to have, for instance, 23,000 mills in this country. Now we have just a handful that are controlled by the big guys, and we need to bring back economic stimulation and small farmers and community. So that is a really big part of this puzzle, is to make sure that we can incent the farmers not only monetarily by creating market pull and adding maybe some guarantees to what we're purchasing, but also to invest in that missing infrastructure. For instance, with buckwheat, we decided through Tin Shed Ventures, which is our venture side of the business, to invest in a mill in Skagit Valley, and particularly it started around buckwheat because that was a great example of something that grew really well in that area and in the country, and we used to have infrastructure set up for that. But when monoculture came in and these communities all sort of broke up and the bigger farms came in, we lost that. And so then that buckwheat system was, maybe whatever was left growing here was then shipped to Asia for processing. And so we lost that. And then we buy it back in other ways. And so we thought, well, that's nuts. Let's just go back to the old model. So sometimes going back in order to go forward is the better thing. Sure. And so that's a great example of that. We brought it back. We have economic stimulation in that community. It's now connecting the miller, the brewer, the baker, the farmer, and building a thriving community around that, and a place for the farmer to put their product, and then we also provide market pull to put it into a product and tell that story. So I think that's one example of how we're approaching that.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to that, is just like Patagonia is doing that is what Pipeline Foods also is doing. And when we entered the space, and one of the original reasons to enter the space is to put the infrastructure in place. Today, organic growers will sometimes drive thousands of miles to get to an elevator. They don't need to do that. So we're actively putting facilities in place. One of our newest elevators we built in Bowbells, North Dakota, but we went back to the way that the old wood crib elevators used to be, when farmers grew multiple rotations and the elevator needed to take multiple crops. Our facility in Bowbells is able to do that. It's a much more modern facility. It's not wood, because the flax just kind of falls out the side, so it's concrete. It stays in there. But we are investing in that, and then building the communities around those facilities to bring back to the brands, and then to bridge that gap. So if there's practices to actually achieve certain outcomes. We're able to create those programs and even create a conservation practice per bushel price that we bring it back to the food company. The food company says, yeah, we'll put X cents per bushel, and that goes back to the farmer. So, but it's about the infrastructure.
All right, well, down to our last minute, so I wish I had a verse or a poem. I didn't, didn't prepare that. If we could all, with one short and spicy sentence, we'll start with Sophie here, so get ready. One short and spicy sentence about what you would want to be remembered for. If somebody came 10 years from now and was going to pay you a compliment for the work you've done to date, what would honor you the most? In other words, if you could only focus on one thing right now that was the most important to be your legacy, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, it's creating young farmer leaders all across the country who feel confident in sharing their stories and asking for what they need and finding people who want to support them. These young people are so passionate about what they're doing, and there are such strong barriers standing in their way, but we need to come together as a community to support them.
Awesome. Ed?
Personally, I would say the idea of sustainability as a service, and that was the catalyst to connect the food company with the farm.
I want to be part of a movement to revitalize rural America.
Me too.
Yeah, hear, hear. Well, we actually have a kick-ass mission statement to have to live up to, which is we're in business to save our home planet, and I think that is a collective action, and it takes a diversity of strategies to do that, and a lot of stakeholders moving down this road, and as Yvonne Chenard says in our film Unbroken Ground, all these people moving in the same direction, you can't believe what we can accomplish. I think if we have a ripple effect together as a community, and we've made an impact, that's a win, so
Awesome.
Excited.
And for me, it would be to show that there are two grazing systems out there. There's the horrific degenerative one that we all know about and see too often, but there's a positive one that makes the world a better place and can heal our planet and save our grasslands. So thank you guys for the time.
Thank you.